This is Faith Footnotes with Northwestern Publishing House, Episode 20, Helping Children Belong in Church. Welcome to Faith Footnotes, Christian Conversations with Northwestern Publishing House. You can find us online at nph.net. My name is Joshua Vick.
And I am Tanya Gerbing.
And we are your hosts for Faith Footnotes.
Like our name suggests, this is a Christian podcast that is all about practical resources for connecting with Christ and Christian living. Typically, we will feature engaging conversations with Christian authors, explore helpful answers to common questions about the Christian life, dig deep into faith-related topics, and more.
If you've spent much time in church, you've probably seen it, or maybe even lived it. A parent sitting in a pew, trying to keep a young child engaged. Maybe there's whispering. Maybe there's a few dropped crayons. Or maybe there's even a quick trip to the back of the church.
For some families, especially those with children who have shorter attention spans or special needs, participating in worship can feel especially challenging. And sometimes that raises a question. Is it even worth it to bring young children to the worship service at all?
Today on Faith Footnotes, we're talking about why worship matters for children and how families and churches can help them participate in meaningful ways.
Joining us are the authors of the book, I Can Go to Church. Madeline Lindke is a mother of two, and Dr. Rachel Youngblom serves as a professor of special education at Martin Luther College, with over 20 years' experience in the field of education.
Welcome to the show, Madeline and Rachel.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So we said in the introduction that worship is meant for the whole family, but families sometimes wonder if bringing their kids to church is worth it, especially if they struggle to sit quietly or stay engaged. From your perspective, how important is it for children to experience worship alongside the congregation?
I always go back to what the Bible tells us about accepting children, just in general. Jesus says, let the little children come to me. And we know that God works faith and strengthens faith in a lot of different ways. And it's important for children to hear God's word and be involved in worship for that reason, to the greatest extent that they're able. So I think that that's important to always remember that children, should be included and shouldn't be hindered from hearing God's word. Children also benefit just in general from seeing their parents and caregivers as models. So bringing children to church and modeling what worship looks like is important. And it's important that children see that worship is important to parents and that parents are setting aside time for worship and to be in fellowship with others as well in hearing God's word.
Personally, I don't think children can learn to be in worship without being in worship. They can't learn the proper social expectations without experiencing them. And even with a child with special needs, every child has a capability of learn. They just might need some accommodations to get to the same access.
Madeline, you wrote I Can Go to Church in part because of your own experience as a parent. Can you share a little about what Sundays at church looked like for your family and what led you to realize a resource like this was needed?
So my first iteration of this book came about because we were having issues with my then 18-month-old going to church. Just being in the sanctuary was a struggle. Wally is very adverse to crowds. He's very adverse to noise. Organs are a huge trigger for him some days. And when talking with his then developmental therapist and speech therapist, they said, perhaps a social story would be a good idea. Yeah, I couldn't find a resource that wasn't severely doctrinally flawed or not from a Roman Catholic perspective. There wasn't anything that was not one of those two. And so I wrote one. Sundays for us were rough, and still are some Sundays for quite a while. We go through ebbs and flows. Some Sundays, I spend the entire Sunday standing at the back of the church, and some Sundays I can get through most of the service. Other Sundays, I'm sitting in the church nursery watching on the TV and helping my son follow along from there. It's not a magic fix. This is a tool in your toolbox you can use to help get your child acclimated. There's no magic wand for getting your kid to do exactly what you want them to do. It's a process. And especially with children like Wally who have sensory issues, not every Sunday is the same. And we wouldn't survive without the church home.
Madeline, I'm wondering if you could describe that struggle, what that might look like a little bit more.
Wally is a runner. If left to his own devices and left completely alone, he would just run laps around the sanctuary the entire service, which is not ideal. Wally is now 6, and he's also the child who might not seem like he's paying attention, but he's absorbing a lot. There are times where I haven't thought he's been paying attention, and all of a sudden, while he's playing, he goes, "Sin bad, Jesus good." And then I'm bawling because I didn't think he was getting anything. Wally is not a child he's active. He's very active. And even my youngest, who's now 4, is a fairly active child, but he can stay in a pew without getting overwhelmed. A lot of the time with Wally, the sitting, the standing, and a lot of people moving is a trigger for him. So we try to work around it the best we can.
Rachel, from your perspective in special education and psychology, what are some reasons that church services can feel overwhelming or difficult for certain children?
Yeah, Maddie touched on actually a couple of really good examples, but children with, but also children without disabilities can struggle with many of the sensory related factors of worship. So, for some, perhaps louder noises from different instruments or microphones might be really upsetting. The brightness of the lights in a church might be overwhelming. Perhaps even the feeling or texture of seating. So, whether there's fabric and cushions, or if seats in church don't have fabric or cushions, that might be aspects of things that a child can struggle with. Also, there's just in general different smells that maybe children, might not be used to from being at home as opposed to just going in a different environment. Also, something to consider is just in general what's developmentally appropriate for attention span. So, little ones are going to have more of a difficult time, and oftentimes students of various ages, children of various ages with disabilities, struggle with attention. And so that attention span is going to be much shorter than an adult's attention span. And also the concept of time is highly abstract for little children and oftentimes even older children with disabilities. And so a longer worship service is going to be that much more challenging without knowing a little bit of the structure and when is this going to start, but when also is the end of this. And so anytime that we can support a child with that structure can be helpful for a student to sustain attention, but also to help them regulate their behavior as well.
So many parents want their children to be a part of worship, but sometimes they feel discouraged when their child struggles to sit or stay engaged. What encouragement would you give to parents in that situation?
I think I still need to reiterate that we don't know and can't judge how God works faith. And again, He works faith in a lot of different ways. But we do know that faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word of Christ. So it's important that even if a child might have challenges or difficulties sitting still or whatnot during a church service, they're still benefiting from being there. We also know children learn from routines and repetition. And so, even if they might struggle at first, it's important to continue to expose them to routines and teach them routines through repetition so that they're able to learn some of those kind of common expectations and those self regulation skills. And just for some children, this takes longer than others. I love what Maddie had said earlier, where you're not going to learn about the expectations or routines of worship unless you, in fact, expose your students or your children, to worship and what that worship routine looks like. So I understand that parents might feel discouraged, but I would just offer that continue to do all the things that you can to the best that you can, because your child is going to benefit.
I would say just don't give up. Parenting's hard. It's hard in different ways for different people. The best advice I can give is take joy in the small wins and blessings.
Mhm.
Nothing is as encouraging as hearing my son for the first time say, "Sin bad, Jesus good." Being able to teach him his bedtime prayers, being able to finally get him to respond back with the Lord's Prayer in certain areas. You take joys in those small wins and you grow on them. And you will have setbacks. Everyone has setbacks. But you don't hold those setbacks as this is it, we're done. You just try again next week.
Beautifully said, Maddie.
So you've touched on this a little bit already, but I want to talk a little bit more about it just because it's easy to assume that if your child isn't sitting quietly or following along, they're not getting anything out of it. And maybe they're thinking, maybe it's distracting for other members, maybe it's distracting for you as a parent. But from a developmental standpoint, what might children still be absorbing? And I know Maddie gave some good examples already, but what might children still be absorbing even when it doesn't look like it?
I mean, just children at a very young age in terms of development, they learn from observing and they just learn from their environment around them. And that can look a lot of different ways. So even if a child doesn't seem like they're actively participating, there still is typically a bit of repetition from church service to church service. So similar songs might be sung, various prayers and creeds might be spoken at each service. And this repetition most definitely is helpful for children to learn those aspects of service as well. So after they hear similar or same songs or the same prayers or creeds through repetition, it's possible that they are internalizing them and they're starting to learn them, or at least they're maybe taking note during a service. Hey, wait a minute, like I've heard this before. And then that even starts to make a child gain a little bit more interest in a service too, if it's something that is a little bit more familiar to them.
So, in your book, you walk children through the different parts of the worship service using very simple language and simple images. What was your goal in designing it that way?
Yeah, I think the book in general is designed to be used as sort of a social story. And Maddie had talked about this previously. And so social stories use pretty simple language that's developmentally and age appropriate. Younger children or children with disabilities. And social stories teach routines and expectations and what some options are for appropriate responses to different situations in more of a narrative format, which can be just incredibly helpful, again, for young children, children with disabilities, children without disabilities. Oftentimes, when you can link something that is very abstract, so again, maybe a social interaction or the concept of time, and if you can link that to something that's more concrete and visual for a child, that it's just easier for them to learn what that social situation, scenario, church service, what that looks like. And so it's easier for them to perhaps learn that routine a little bit quicker.
It's also part of the reason we ended up putting images in the line of our text to make those abstract ideas have a physical representation to children.
Correct. Yeah.
When you had this idea to write the book, Maddie, how did you get in touch with Rachel or how did you guys work together on this?
So I did my original copy of the book with images I got off Google, and I kind of submitted it to NPH as this has been helping me. Maybe it can help someone else. The worst they can say is no. And heard back that we like this. We love it. We're not sure what we're doing with it yet, but hang on.
Yeah, it was really cool. Maddie, I have to give praise to Maddie because Maddie really did a lot of the legwork. And in my background, just in psychology and special education, and particularly a lot of work that I have done in the past with children with autism, it was so much fun to be able to see, again, what Maddie had already created. And then we really worked together with just maybe kind of some additional language and the layout. And Maddie, again, already had great ideas for the icons and the pictures that are used to link some of those more abstract concepts with something that's tangible and a little bit more structured and concrete for students. So she did a ton of really the legwork, kind of getting it started, and I was happy to kind of just take a look and add some snippets based on my area of expertise as well.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the strategy behind the images?
Mine was to get those concepts across in a way that was familiar to him, so using images that were already similar to systems he was using at school, that on his alternative augmented communication device or AAC device or his iPad, depending on how we wanna look at that, his image board that he was using to communicate, I was trying to find images that were similar.
Yeah, and I think, again, just the images that maybe are more abstract, being able to give an icon or something that's maybe a little bit more tangible to a child to show them what that looks like maybe in real life to the best extent possible, or something that is familiar to them. We know that children can really learn easier when, again, new concepts can be linked with things that they already know and that they're already aware of. So really taking a look at some readily available icons, pictures that are out there, and then just linking them to kind of keywords and phrases was the intent behind that.
One thing I really like about this book is that it's rearrangeable. You can actually move pages around to match the flow of a church service. So if something different is happening, for example, like a baptism or communion, you can match that in the book. Why is that mix of structure and flexibility so helpful for kids?
Yeah, just developmentally, children really thrive on structure, routines, predictability. So, alerting children as to what is going to happen and what to expect. And again, like putting something that's more abstract, like kind of just the concept of time, into something more concrete and tangible can be really incredibly comforting for a child who might struggle with things that are unpredictable. So it can help really alleviate some stress and support some self-regulation skills. And so when we're looking for, or hoping that a child is able to, sit through a worship service, sustain some attention there, providing them with some idea of what is going to happen, there's maybe a lower likelihood of maybe seeing some of those more challenging behaviors that a young child or a child with a disability might display. So the book is really designed. I think that this is just a really cool, unique feature that if a church service changes from week to week, you have some options. So either before the service begins, if you get a bulletin insert, perhaps that you can quickly kind of pull out pages and create the flow of the book based on the outline of the service. That's a way that you might be able to use the book. And then before the church service starts, maybe kind of go through that book with your child. Or if you by chance know ahead of time what the service might look like in terms of structure, you can create the flow of that service at home then already. So even maybe a day or two prior, or even the week before that, your worship service, that you're able to read the book once, twice, how many ever times you think would be appropriate before that church service, just to help them really understand what's going to happen, what's going on in the church service, and potentially help them out with some choices of how they might react in that church service as well.
I know for us, depending on the week, we use different settings in the hymnal, different, divine service, service of the word and sacrament. And so I try to adjust it based on that. And honestly, even when traveling to my congregation back in Canada that my parents are still members of, that service looks very different than our service here. No two churches have the same looking service every Sunday. And so we wanted to be able to make this book available to as many people as possible that way.
So the book really becomes a bulletin for your child.
Yeah, that's a way to think about it.
Well, speaking about progress in a church service, progress isn't always linear and can happen in small steps. How might success in a worship look like for a child who is still learning how to participate in a service?
I think that that's just it's an extremely difficult answer to give.
Yeah.
It's going to be completely dependent on each individual child. Some children might learn routines and expectations more quickly than other children. But I think the biggest kind of big picture thing that parents could focus on instead would be just what's important for them and their family, and just never forget to focus on that their child ultimately is a loved and redeemed child of God, regardless of how a child participates in worship.
And in our family's success, lately, because of a seasonal change, is looking like we are actually sitting in a pew. We're not standing, we're not in the nursery, we're getting into a pew. And that's what success is for us. If we make it past the psalm that week, I consider it a huge success because that means Wally was able to stay in one area, not necessarily sitting, but in that area for that length of time. And that's a success for us right now. We're going through a seasonal change and he's struggling. And so his sensory issues are much more pronounced.
Successes might change from week to week, from season to season.
6 months ago, success would have been making it all the way through the service. It depends. We shift the goalposts when needed.
I like that, Maddie. Yeah.
For parents, I think that's a key line right there, just because success is such a relative term from family to family and even week to week, as he said. So that's a good point to remember. We talked about having this resource, thinking about what parents can do. Well, what are some simple ways congregations and even fellow church members can do to create a more welcoming environment for children who may experience worship differently?
I think just in general, being a welcoming community to families of little ones and families with children who have disabilities, coming from a mindset of just understanding and compassion by modeling patience and acceptance. At times, if anytime pastors or congregation members can just really normalize different ways that individuals worship, that can be really helpful. In terms of the environment itself, just allowing families, just give them opportunity to sit wherever they feel the most comfortable. So whether that's aisle seats, whether that's in the back row, whether that's setting up chairs further back in the sanctuary, again, just kind of providing some flexible seating, I think that is helpful. Allowing parents to leave if they need be, to have a sensory friendly space in church or a quiet corner, quiet separate area. Maddie, I think you had mentioned that maybe your church has a separate room with a TV where you can still engage in worship with your child. I think that that's an excellent option. I think that some churches have maybe, I don't know what you would call them, like kind of goodie bags or activity bags. Sometimes that can be helpful to have different like fidget tools for students who need some sort of sensory input, or even noise reducing headphones. Sometimes those might be an option for children who they're just a little bit overwhelmed in the moment with different kind of sensory related things. So those would just be kind of a couple ideas. Maddie, I'm sure you have a lot of other ideas as well.
For us, what really helps me, because my husband's a pastor, so I'm the parent in the pew, is having people I can rely on to watch my youngest child when my older one needs to be removed. Having people I can leave my youngest Charlie with, who I know will help him go through service just like I would. What helps us the most in church? Headphones. Having those, they look like they shooting range headphones. Well, they would not make it through a lot of church services without those. Also, having places in church we can either watch or listen to. Our congregation has 2 different rooms with TVs in it that we can watch, and then I have also installed a baby monitor from the sanctuary to our library for a quieter place.
Hmm, there
So
you
having
go.
the options.
That's
Oh,
a nice way to repurpose a baby monitor, right? I haven't heard of that one, so that's
it worked really well. And knowing that families like mine are hyper aware of the type of responses we get when our kids act out.
Mhm.
Church is supposed to be a safe space emotionally and spiritually. And being aware that families like mine are hyper aware when we get the stares. We're very aware when people start puffing and acting frustrated. I know my kid is distracted. I'm aware and I try to mitigate that as much as possible, but I can't mitigate that entirely. Just giving us a bit of grace, especially when it's a visiting person and you don't know their circumstances, goes a long way.
Parents who might be hearing about I Can Go to Church for the first time, how do you hope families will use this resource at church and at home?
I think I would just encourage parents, caregivers to take a look at the book and just see what portions work best for you, your child, your family. Even if it's only a couple of pages, even if it's only maybe the icons on the back that allow your child to maybe point to their wants or their needs. You don't have to use the entire book all at once. And so I think that that's what's nice about how it's a little bit customizable to each family and different situations. I think that any time that you can integrate that book as more of a social story, and using it either during the service or even before the service to, again, work on kind of the structure and routines and allowing your child to understand the structure of worship. It is used to be helpful in kind of a preventative way, because we know that alerting a child to those procedures or routines can be very helpful and help things go maybe a little bit more smoothly. But at the end of the day, I think just seeing what is going to work best for you and your family, and hopefully that can be just a little bit of an extra support for parents, family members, individuals with little ones, or individuals with disabilities, an extra tool in your toolbox to support you particularly during those church service times.
My recommendation would be to start small. If your child or person with disability is struggling with a certain area of service, start there. Right now, we're really struggling with hymns. So, we read through the social aspect of the hymns and we read on the back of the expectations. And I try to help him by modeling for him what the expectation is. So if it's time to pray, I help him fold his hands. And we do this at home the night before so we have an idea of what we're walking into the next day. It doesn't always work. It's not magic, but it does help a lot with some of the outbursts that we get. Starting small.
Agreed.
What encouragement would you share with families who want their children to grow in faith through worship, even when the process feels challenging?
I think just in general, just know that your efforts are not in vain. Any exposure to God's word is always going to be a good thing. Again, we know that God works faith in lots of different ways. As you're thinking about how to support your child during worship, just know that any effort that you can continue to provide to ensure that your child has access to God's word and is hearing God's word, that's always going to be a positive thing.
Don't give up. I mean, there have been times where I didn't think Wally was understanding anything in the service because he doesn't look like he's paying attention, even if he is. He doesn't have the neurotypical meet your eyes when he's looking at you. He doesn't have the typical paying attention cues, but he does retain things. He'll come home with sentences my husband has said during the sermon, things I didn't think he would pick up on. It's hard in the moment, but the payoff is worth
I think that's really important to remember. Well, thank you very much, Madeline and Rachel, for joining us today. This has been a wonderful conversation.
You can find the show notes and links to the resources discussed on today's show at blog.nph.net. Let us know what your biggest takeaway was from today's show in the comments section, and be sure to follow our show on your preferred podcast platform. We hope you join us next month for another great conversation.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Faith Footnotes from Northwestern Publishing House. Keep the conversation going by visiting nph.net.